All right.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. Gonna talk with my brother, Nick Heffelfinger, again today about whatever comes up. I tentatively decided on Corona covers, the pandemic, and how people are politicizing it, which we've talked about a little bit. And why don't you start off with what you were just starting to tell me, Nick, about Corona covers and how you came up with them and everything to do
Yeah.
with that.
For anybody watching this who doesn't know, I guess Corona covers aren't like things that I put on stuff to cover them from Corona or anything. It's me doing covers of songs during the pandemic, and I've written sort of parody lyrics of them to address issues from the virus. And then also, so far I've only done one, but I'm intending to do a few others. Just songs that I feel like speak to what's happening in the world, either ironically or sarcastically, or honestly and authentically. Which really just came about as I sing and perform and write music and do that kind of stuff a lot, and don't have any outlets for that right now, with the world kind of being at a standstill. And more so than that, it's looking like for the foreseeable future, at least the next 6 months to a year, if not a couple of years, where any kind of significant public performances, like the kind of stuff that I normally do, just probably won't really be happening. Not that there won't be things I can act in or music to perform, but it won't be happening in the context of like hundreds of people going to a theater or a concert venue anytime too soon, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
so
so, wait,
that as sort of just a way to
say a little more about that, that in general for people who don't know about that aspect of you.
yeah. For anybody who doesn't know me who's watching this, I guess I'm an actor and a musician, and I also do a lot of work behind the scenes in film and television and theater, and just event production in general. That being like outdoor events and festivals and concerts and community days and that kind of stuff. And basically all of that kind of stuff is not coming back until we have a vaccine, or until at least there's enough like community immunity, as it were, achieved, that it's feasible to have people gather for those types of things. I was reading a really interesting report about coronavirus and sort of the BC government specifically, but based on lots of reports from all over the world, governments plans for how to kind of like return to function and what our version of normal should be until there's a vaccine and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things they talked about is the kind of the scale of measuring how much you should permit a type of activity to happen is like a square that measures the intensity of contact and the duration of contact. So if people have to be in contact for a long period of time, then you want the intensity of that contact to be short. Like you don't want them to be touching each other. You want them to be able to be far apart, not breathing the same air or touching the same objects or doing whatever else. So that makes things like sporting events and movie theater type events like potentially possible in the near future with just like significantly limited audiences, essentially. You let groups of people sit next to each other in a movie theater, but there has to be a 2-seat gap between groups or something, and you only fill every second row, or I don't know what exactly the limitations would be. But it makes things like reopening retail businesses possible. You just limit the number of people that are allowed inside the business at one time, which by that nature sort of promotes less people being near each other all the time. The problem with that is concerts and theater events are based entirely around people being close to each other for long periods of time. And basically all of those events, and this is sort of the kicker, rely on gate, as in ticket sales, in order to be able to function. Like if you significantly reduce the capacity of a theater, they now can't make enough money to afford to do the show. And that is true of most concerts, most theater performances, and almost anything that happens in like a live context with a ticketed audience. The ticketed audience pays for the thing to happen. It's also how they make money, but only by margins, not by like significant portions, you know?
Mm-hmm. I was hearing something similar about that in terms of restaurants, because apparently, particularly in some states in the U.S., some restaurants are starting to reopen, but only at 50% capacity, and that apparently isn't a good idea for restaurants either, because even if when they're at 100% capacity, most restaurants have a really difficult time making ends meet rather, and like apparently according to some recent polls, a lot of people are not like the vast majority of people are not wanting to go to these public gatherings with lots of people, even something like a restaurant, anytime soon. And then, like you said, in terms of movie theaters, for example, is everyone really going to follow that rule? Like, it seems like that would either require a lot of work to enforce, and people would protest that too, or people aren't entirely going to follow the rules if they implement those anyway. Also, just to go back to a second, in terms of your Corona covers, people should check out your YouTube channel for that. You've got a lot of those on there, like over half a dozen or something. Oh wait, is it around that number, right?
Yeah, I think I have 6 or 7 up in total. And like I said, I'm planning to put up more. I'm just sort of lazy and doing other things a lot of the time and whatnot. Coming back to what you're saying, I've been sort of talking about this kind of information in a lot of contexts quite a lot today in the last couple of days, mostly because in British Columbia, they're starting to kind of return to some level of normalcy. We're sort of in phase 1 of a, I think, 4-phase plan to start reopening some businesses and returning some social functions and capacities and stuff like that. But still significant restrictions. And one of the things that's in that context is phase 4 is where large public social gatherings and theater events and concerts and that kind of stuff would be happening. So in terms of like my own personal livelihood and the way I choose to make an income and am able to make an income, that's a huge portion of my lifestyle. But that being said, I also work at a rock climbing gym, or at least did before the pandemic, which is potentially looking at reopening. And that presents all kinds of like really interesting, really kind of unique challenges for how to function and stay open, and definitely hits on what you were talking about just like best laid plans or best intentions are great, but when people don't follow guidelines, that presents problems. And the report I was reading today was talking about essentially what worked with social distancing in BC is we responded a little bit sooner than they did in some other places in the country. And for a combination of factors, which really you can only speculate on, it's hard to really like determine what all of them were. But for whatever reason, people in BC, just observably by the statistics, seem to have done a slightly better job at social distancing than in other places in the country. Somewhat as a result of government guidelines, somewhat as a result of personal choices, maybe somewhat as a result of geography. Once again, as I said, we don't have all the factors, and it's not really worth speculating on what they all are. But the statistics show us that the number of cases that presented themselves in BC, the amount of growth there was, and then the amount of drop was lesser than in other places. As a result, they're proposing / supposedly have observed is the result of just slightly better social distancing being observed. And that's not really a matter of like significantly stricter restrictions. It's just really a matter of collectively people having done just a little bit better at following the rules. And that really, what that comes down to is like a measure of percentages. I think you could probably make a pretty reasonable argument for some of that having to do with climate and geography. The fact that more of BC got into spring and like somewhat warmer, more amenable temperatures before Corona started hitting hard meant that it was easier, I think, for people to survive the whole staying inside and staying apart from other people thing. I think a lot of other places didn't respond as well to that for a number of reasons. But all of what I'm getting at with that is because of that, they're starting to look at kind of returning to some version of normalcy slowly right now. But what was observed is that what worked to keep the spread of COVID-19 down was a social distancing protocol of about 80%. So 20% of the time, people weren't following social distancing measures, and 80% of the time they were, is what it seems like was the kind of like overall breakdown across the province. And some of that is the result of the measures were strict enough to almost necessitate like at least a 50-50. You know, when you make most of the businesses close down and make most of the public gathering spaces illegal to gather in and hard to get to and close all the parking lots at them, you know, you just when you make it that hard for people to gather, it fulfills that prophecy by itself in a lot of contexts. But people also did a lot of that work themselves, which is why BC is trying to go back to normal. But their plan for going back to like normal now isn't just reopen everything 100%, because obviously that would screw us over. It's a plan to go back to somewhere between 40 and 60%, because the proposed idea is that 60% as much contact as was normal will still be enough to keep the threshold low, because the prevalence of cases right now is so low. And then if there starts to be like another spike in cases, you just like impose the restrictions again for another couple of weeks, and that'll drop it back down. The problem I have with that is two things. One, if you give people 60%, they'll probably go 80. Like, people don't follow the rules 100% of the time. And people are getting quarantine fatigue, man. People are getting tired of following social distancing rules. You know, like when we were 2 or 3 weeks into this and there were lots of people around the world dying and the numbers were going up exponentially every day, at least from my life, most people were observably following the rules. They were wearing masks. They were staying 6 feet apart from each other. They were staying home a lot and doing all that stuff. Now that they've started pulling back those restrictions even a little bit, people are starting to like just hang out in groups and, you know, just go out in public with no mask on to do their grocery shopping and whatever. And, you know, not bother that. The biggest one I've noticed a lot is just like kind of self-awareness failures, like not bothering to think hard enough about like, am I making it possible for other people to get past me on this path and still maintain social distance? And if the answer is no, maybe you shouldn't be walking 4 people wide on a trail. I don't know.
Okay. There's a lot that you said there that I wanted to comment on. So first of all, I'll take these in kind of like reverse order. So like in terms of those numbers that you said, 80% and 60%, like those are really specific numbers. Maybe there's a little bit of leeway, like a few percentage one way or the other. And just is the idea with 80% that number is flattening the curve roughly?
Yeah, so the proposal, what it's based on, for anyone watching who's curious that wants to look, is the BC government recently released like a detailed strategy, like their I think it's called their Go Forward plan, essentially the plan for what the province of British Columbia is going to do moving forward through COVID-19, essentially until there's a vaccination and herd immunity has been developed enough so that we can return to living life as if coronavirus doesn't really like dictate our livelihood, which it's inarguably, it currently does. So they used like computer simulation models of just like hypothetical outcomes of different percentages of distancing and kind of the amounts of spread that there was, and were able to basically, by comparing the models that they used back in the beginning of March to where we're at now, they're making the argument that we were at around 80% successful social distancing measures based on like how much of a growth and then how much of a drop and how much the curve has flattened now. Which is also where they get the idea from that if you do that, flatten the curve, and then go right back to 100%, it's just going to spike again. Like flattening the curve, but it's still being around, and then returning to normal doesn't keep the curve flat. You just basically doom yourself all over again. But because you flatten the curve well enough, you can go back to about 60% of normal amount of social interaction and still keep the curve flat enough to avoid pandemic rates. What they don't say in the report, which is definitely true in the report, is it's flat enough. It's not as flat. There's going to be more cases with 60% interaction than there would be with 20. That's just like math. That's how spreading stuff works, you know? But 60% is sort of like that threshold that they've decided. And I got to be honest, like it's the government and they're talking to experts. So I'd assume, hopefully, that most of those people know more about this than I do, that are making these decisions. That decision-making factor is supposedly around what will keep us in a frame of reality where we can handle it, essentially. That doesn't necessarily mean there won't still be people getting it, and it doesn't necessarily mean there won't be more people dying than there would be if we all just kept staying home. The difference is a lot more of the economy will function, a lot more people will be back to work, a lot more types of business will be open, more regular life things that people do will be achievable, but at the cost of somewhat of an increase in the spread. Like if you look at the chart of the way we flatten the curve in BC, it's essentially like a flat line that's going to kind of continue at the rate it is, meaning there will continue to be new cases, but there won't be an increase in the number of new cases per day. It'll proceed at like a relatively speaking low rate. You know, there'll be the occasional bubble of cases that pops up here and there, but no real like tragic concern.
Okay.
If you go to 60, that line does ramp back up. It's just a pretty shallow ramp. So it's a ramp that our healthcare system could deal with. It's a ramp that's slow enough that if it starts being more significant, you could introduce restrictions and respond to again. But right now, I can't help but feel that all we're really doing is taking like a couple week vacation from what will inevitably be another quarantine. Especially because a lot of the things that are being reopened don't seem to me like things that are necessary openings. Like during the kind of quarantine time, if you will, the only things that were open were things that were deemed essential, which was sort of a broad terminology. Lots of stuff made it through that cutoff, but lots of stuff didn't. Through this phase 1 thing in BC, they're starting to open like hair salons and gyms and retail stores and bars and restaurants with reduced capacities and all that kind of stuff. And I got to be honest, like not all of that stuff is essential or even necessary or even very important. Like we could all just have long hair for a year. I'm pretty sure we could all survive that. I'm reasonably certain no one would die if we just didn't cut our hair for a year. Some of us might feel bad about our hairstyles, but if more people live, I sort of feel like that's worth doing. But we're legitimately in a world where enough people have made the argument that they want a haircut, that that's not the decision we made.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is why, like some of the different responses to this and the, I would say that's like you were talking about how that's related to a wide variety of different factors, and there are clearly different cultural and political differences that impact how people respond to this. Like you were saying, people have isolation or quarantine fatigue, for example, and then like hair salons, for example. It's hard to know with a lot of these things in terms of places that are opening, like, and in terms of people protesting, for example, how much of that is people wanting stores to open and how much of that is workers at the stores wanting to go back to work. Because especially this also relates to another thing you mentioned that I wanted to comment on. um, at least a good thing for you, even though you're not working, is that you get the Canada emergency, or the coronavirus rather, emergency response benefit, which anyone who's lost work due to coronavirus gets that money from the federal government here, and then you just are getting a provincial payment as well, which is enough to cover, and even slightly more than, I think, what you were making working your ass off all the time and not getting any benefits or anything like that. And then, like, in terms of the protests, a lot of the protests in the States are happening because it's still the case that people have gotten a one-time $1,200 payment, and but unlike in Canada or in other countries, for example, there isn't like debt forgiveness. The like, people still have to pay their debts, they still have to pay their bills, they still have to feed their families, and they're not being allowed to go to work, so they have to, like, some of them have to choose between possibly losing their homes and risking the virus. And then also, like, in terms of what you were saying about like the markets reopening, so to speak. Yeah, that's an interesting experiment. We'll have to see how it works out. And I mean, like, there's so many different perspectives to have on this too. Like there are associated consequences of markets being closed that you and I have talked about before. Like, there's a reduced food supply at grocery stores when we need them the most, because food production is lower because places are closed, like school. And then um, there oh shit, I lost I lost my train of thought there in terms of that. But I also wanted to ask you about those waves that you mentioned too. Like, how are the waves going to be different, and how long are there going to be between the different waves?
So like right now, phase one, or like the first wave or whatever you want to call it, was like reopening public parks, returning some of the retail sector, opening hair salons, returning some capacity to bars and restaurants, letting fitness centers start to open up again. Just like kind of a whole short list of basically ways for people to spend money, if I'm being like totally blunt and like a violent left-winger, realist. Like,
Well,
one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot
counter
lately
that,
is
like people say that it depends on, like, like the economy has all of these factors that affect people in the virus, like, right, like if we keep markets closed long enough, we might run out of food, for example. Oh yeah, that's the other thing that I forgot about, that they're like, with the isolation, there's apparently the percentages of people who are committing suicide, and the domestic abuse rates, and the alcohol consumption are up, and those factors,
yeah, well, and like I remember really early on in this thing, like pre a lot of the government programming being announced around like people getting unemployment funding and that kind of stuff, there was a lot of kind of social arguing and political movements around people getting money from the government because of losing their jobs for COVID. And one of the arguments was like, there's a lot of research to show that for every % increase in unemployment, there's a related increase in the mortality rate,
yeah,
both from like people not being able to afford food, people committing suicide, domestic disputes increasing at home, either because like a domestic dispute can arise for something as simple as that person lost their job and their wife screamed at them for losing their job and now not being able to pay the rent or whatever. And then they get in a physical altercation and that guy kills his wife. And now the mortality rate is higher. And the like far more nuanced stuff of like people starving to death and people, you know, dying of heart attacks or stress related whatevers because of overworking themselves or working 3 low paying jobs because they lost their high paying job. Or, you know, like one of the things about unemployment that I feel like a lot of people forget to contextualize sometimes is part of the reason unemployment exists is if a tenured professor at Harvard loses his job and is struggling to find a job for a number of months, the fact that he was working hard enough to be a tenured professor at Harvard sort of actually gives him the like social credit, if you will, to argue for not having a job while he looks for that job for a bit, not going to get 3 Walmart jobs. That's sort of how unemployment works at some level, you know? Right now, under coronavirus, that's not really how it works. Everybody's getting like the same piece of the pie. And that argument is made for reasons of like that way it's easier to get money into people's hands. It's just like faster if you give everybody a sort of like middle ground amount of money. But I think about that in the like context of like
type of style, right?
Yeah, like EI is normally 55% of your regular income. And if you have a variable income, then you're able to like argue for getting the amount based off of the most you normally earn, I think, or something like that. With CERB, the emergency response benefit, it's just $500 a week if you're eligible for it, which is great if you're a low income earner, as Andrew was saying. For me earlier, like unless I'm working
like me, I don't earn, and I haven't earned because I'm such a low income earner. I don't get this CERB because
no, sorry. What I was talking about was for me, if you're somebody who's working enough to be eligible, or who was working enough to be eligible for it, but weren't a high paid employee, like we're working for minimum wage or essentially under $20 an hour and or less than full time, you're going to be making more money off CERB than you would be making working a full-time job. So right now I'm making similar money, if not more in some regards, than I was making before the pandemic. And the bigger thing is I have like no expenses. Like obviously I still have to pay rent and I still pay for food, but being this much less active and going out this much less also means I'm paying less for food because I'm eating out less, and I'm also just, you know, probably consuming less calories. And then I'm not, you know, going to concerts and festivals and events. I'm not going out to bars and restaurants with friends and spending money on things I don't really need. I'm spending less money buying stuff at stores because I just don't really go out to stores. I, you know, buy stuff online if it's something I need. But, and then it's also like you're trying to avoid interpersonal contact as much as possible. So even ordering stuff online, it's like, do I really need this? Do I need to encourage a person who wouldn't otherwise need to come to my house to come to my house? Yeah, okay, I want this enough for that to be worth it. They're, you know, doing reasonable things to keep stuff safe and clean. But I do have to think about a lot of time in the context of like, I personally feel like I'm doing fairly okay and even maybe arguably doing well amidst this whole thing because I'm getting all this money coming in and I don't have to be working right now. So I have lots of time to work on my own stuff and do things I'd rather be doing. But for lots of people who used to be making more money and are maybe not even just making less money now, but not making enough money to pay for their expenses. Like if you live in Vancouver and have more than one child, I would be amazed if you can pay your rent and food bills for an entire month off $2,000. So you better hope both the people in your household are eligible for CERB, or one of you still able to work. And even if they are, $4,000 a month is like a decent amount of money. But $48,000 a year for a 4-person family is not very much money. And that's like below the poverty line in Vancouver.
What's the poverty line there?
Oh, I don't know, like $75 billion probably. No, like the average single family rent in Vancouver proper, like not in the lower mainland, but like actually physically, geographically in Vancouver is over $2,000 a month for like a 1-bedroom apartment. It's insanity to live here. So, you know, like I'm sure lots of families in British Columbia right now are struggling in some context financially. And then also there's all the people who were making lots of money, but just aren't eligible for CERB because of the way they were making it. Like if you were self-employed in
Like
any
me.
context, you're just basically not eligible for it. And if you were an artist working freelance, a lot of my artist friends haven't been eligible for CERB unless they had a like non-artist job or like a job as an arts administrator or something that was enough to just be eligible for CERB from that. So, you know, even in a place like BC where they've done better than most places in the world, I would say, for covering their citizens and providing money to get us through this, there are a lot of people who aren't having an easy time. And then, yeah, exactly like you're talking about, if you're somebody in the States who got a one-time $1,200 payment over 2 months ago now, and whether you're eligible for EI or not, EI is so backed up in the States right now, people are spending entire days on hold just to not get through. Like I read a post from a guy recently that was like, I know I lost my job, but I wake up every morning at 8 a.m. and call EI and stay on hold until the office closes. So I sort of feel like I have a full-time job.
Wow. Yeah.
And part of that is like you apply and then you have to call in to like provide a piece of documentation or answer some questions or something to like get your money. And then you can't get through because the lines are so overwhelmed. So you're like literally sitting there having to call them and be on hold every day because that's the only way you're ever going to get your income, which will allow you to not become homeless or not, you know, not be able to eat this week or whatever else. The other thing that's been really good in BC that I don't think has happened in lots of other places, certainly haven't done the research to find out because once I knew my own ass was covered, I kind of just stopped worrying, to be honest, is in BC, they put a moratorium on evictions, which means if you fail to pay your rent during the coronavirus, there's not really anything your landlord can do. Like they could still evict you and it's until September, I think. So technically they could like still evict you in September if you didn't pay your rent the whole time, and maybe even still technically take you to court to claim that you owed them the money. But you don't have to worry about like spontaneously becoming homeless on June 1st.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. The only problem I've heard people complain about.
I'm still listening. I'm just going to step off camera to get some more water.
Okay. I've heard people say that there could be one problem with that, which is that the landlord's salaries of the place, they would lose a lot of money from that. And obviously it depends on the place because there are landlords who have more expensive properties and probably have a lot more savings, but then I wonder if landlords' salaries are being supplemented in the same ways that they are somewhere, or maybe they just get at least in Vancouver too specifically, maybe they just get they can get the CERB too, and that's enough to account for them not getting those funds from the rent that they would be receiving. If that's how it works.
Oh, Andrew.
And then no one gets evicted.
I love the term landlord salary.
Well, I mean what they get from rent. I don't mean an actual salary. Like
here's my super quick, super left-wing response to that. A landlord,
super left-wing.
A landlord is not a job. Being a landlord,
yeah, it is.
Listen,
you have to
being a landlord.
You're responsible for fixing everything in whatever house or houses that you have. That's your job.
True, as a part of your investment in owning that property. Being a landlord is being an investor in property, and part of the condition of being the investor as a property owner is the maintenance of that property, so it's a viable investment. The same way that if you invest in a business, it needs to make money in order to make you money. In order for your house to make money as a property investor, aka a landlord, you have to upkeep it enough that it's livable. However, that income is not guaranteed. So if the people who live in your investment undergo a loss of income, you are also going to undergo a loss of income. That's just like
That's
the
not
way that works.
that's
But
not the,
landlords aren't eligible for
that's clearly
CERB because it's
clearly
not a
not the way
salary.
that
It's not
works
an
all the
income you
time
gain from
though.
doing a job.
Like a lot of the time, obviously landlords, like some landlords, I'm not saying this represents all landlords in general. Everyone has heard stories about landlords not giving a fuck when people lose their jobs and not lowering their rent.
I think you're thinking of landlord in the context, Andrew, of like, sorry, I froze. I think you're thinking of landlord, Andrew, in the context of like an individual person who owns an individual property that a small number of individuals live in, which is certainly a type of landlord. But landlords are also like the people who own an apartment building or the company that owns 14 apartment buildings, right? Like at some level, property owners are just investors. And if they have to do work or hire other people to do work to maintain that property and that investment, that's the reality of having that investment. But that's not employment for which they get paid. So within that context, a landlord's not eligible for CERB because it's not like that's the money that they get from owning property is not employment income, it's investment income. And that's like that's not just me like being me, that's like how it works from a taxation perspective too. The money that you make from having income from owning a house, if you have renters, isn't viewed as like your income in terms of like your employment income, it's viewed as investment income. Right. That's how you claim it on taxes. That's how it gets taxed and everything else. Part of that being the fact that like
the CERB then?
Yeah.
That's what that means?
Part of that being the fact that like there could be months or years of time where your investment is fine. You know, like, yeah, you're right. A landlord has to like fix the plumbing if the plumbing stops working in a house or replace the fridge if it breaks down. But when the plumbing's working fine and the electricity is running and the fridge works, they still make the same amount of money. Like in a month where they provide no services to their renters or a month where they provide numerous services to their renters, the amount of rent paid is the same because ultimately the renter is paying for the right to make use of that investment, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that, which is also interesting because in BC, since they were aware that that was going to be a huge thing, since like property investment is a huge income source for so many people, it's certainly not employment, but it's definitely a source of income. They introduced a like rent supplement program essentially, and it's not a huge thing, but it was $500 a month for families and $300 a month for individuals as like a subsidy to your rent. And it's literally money the government will send directly to your landlord every month.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's we talked about this a little bit before. It's kind of I kind of find it simultaneously hilarious and phenomenally disappointing. What?
Just hold on a second, you froze. Oh, you're back now.
Okay. You froze a few times there. I think you're looking good now though. It's simultaneously hilarious and phenomenally disappointing the degree to which people are politicizing coronavirus. It really did just like every day it both makes me laugh and pisses me off. It's like people like it seems like for the most part the way that you were talking about earlier how people have politicized it is typically like the more left-wing response is like more authoritarianism, more take care of people, more fuck the corporations, and on the maybe on the more right side it's like open up the markets, this isn't as serious as people thought it was, the corporations need money too, so the economy can make money. Although there's been like even oh, did you just get kicked out? I'll have to come back there. Hopefully we'll get back in a second here. I'll see if he's coming back in a sec there. But yeah, I'll just keep talking about that until he gets back. That it's interesting that there's some crossover though. There's more. There's sort of a more moderate perspective to some degree, even among politicians, like how I've seen like both far left wing and right wing people criticize like the American response, for example. Oh, there he is. You there? Okay. Did you hear what I said? Did you still hear what I said after you got kicked out there?
No, I was your audio was cutting in and out a bunch, so I just like minimized the window and tried to shut other stuff down on my computer because I figured it maybe was a processor or internet thing. And then I couldn't like get the window to come back for some reason, and then eventually it just cut out. I think I just like accidentally minimized the window for long enough for it to think I had like left on purpose or something. But whenever
Okay.
I'm back.
I was just saying that yeah, people have that's how stereotypically they've been politicized. But then again, there's some like kind of bipartisanship, not in terms of like, well, just in terms of like people's perceptions about it too. Like I've seen a lot of progressive political YouTube YouTube, yeah, political commentators criticize like all the stimulus bills in America that have given like trillions of dollars to corporations and that one-time $1,200 payment to people. I've seen progressives criticize that. I've seen populist right-wingers criticize that too. That sort of thing seems like a thing that both populist right-wingers and populist left-wingers are kind of united on. They're united on like providing a UBI sort of thing because they're pro-workers, so to speak. So they're like like both populist left-wingers and populist right-wingers are like pro-worker, pro-UBI, anti-giving trillions of dollars to corporations. But then at what I've seen anyway is still understanding that it's not a good idea for people to go in large groups of people or to protests and whatnot. But oh shit, you got kicked out there again. I think Nick might be having a bad connection there. I'm gonna see if he's still there. Might have to just try. Well, clicking the original link again is probably always getting back on it right now. What? Sorry, let's see where Nick is here. But yeah, anyway, I'll still go on with what I was saying before he got kicked out there. Like there's oh, okay, there he is. There you are. You got kicked out again?
Yeah, I'm uploading a bunch of stuff off my computer right now to try and make some space off on my hard drive. And I think that's what was slowing it down. So I just switched to my phone.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was saying like I've seen that both populist left wingers and populist right wingers are united for like pro workers things, so like pro UBI, anti giving trillions of dollars to corporations, understanding that we need to practice social distancing and all those safety measures and avoid going in large groups of people to events like protests, but at the same time, like we already mentioned, totally understanding why people are protesting, because if you only get $1,200 one time and it's literally illegal for you to work, then you could possibly risk your house and your family your family's starving if you don't do everything you can to get your employment back in some way. So
Yeah, right. Like if you give people no choice, like what else do you expect them to do but have no choice and make the no choice decision?
yeah.
I also think there's which I've talked to a lot of people about in a lot of different contexts already. Sorry, I'm just grabbing my phone charger, which is why it's freaking pitch black in here.
Okay.
Is there's a lot of people, and this is both in the context of like unemployment and just like regular day-to-day income. There's a lot of people who have this sort of like weird pride or like whatever else mentality around earning money of like, not just it's good to provide for your family or for yourself or, you know, like work hard to support your livelihood, but that like you must, that like not being able to is like a disservice to your humanity or some shit.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm actually pretty sure that like when there's a global pandemic and it's dangerous for people to go outside, it's a shitty dickhead move to choose to do that anyways, just because you want to have a job.
Well,
like if your job isn't necessary to keep us alive, you're a piece of shit for wanting to go back to work just so you can feel good about yourself.
Okay, well, you went a little more extreme than I would have there. I wouldn't say that those people are pieces of shit. I think they have what I would say is they have this puritanical culture that I like to criticize all the time myself, which is it's laid into the fabric of our modern Western culture is this puritanism. Like there's literally like a spiritual or even like divine, that's a good word for it. There are divine benefits to working hard, like this Protestant Christian puritanism. Yeah, the specifically Protestant Christian work ethic that people like 100 years ago or more have really valued since then. And it isn't even that it's even historically pretty recent, but still very prominent that, you know, there is value in work just for work's sake, so you can work. It reminds me too of how I think I told you and a few other people about this. It's interesting to see how different your values can be, because I was telling some people about this and their responses differed. And it was when I was offered that job to basically have more responsibility and I think it means being in charge of an entire polling station if I want to work at one of the next elections, and I would get like a lot more money, something like $54 an hour, and but I would have to have this much more responsibility, and I also would have to, a crucial factor is that I would have to sign a contract to stay here for another 10 years, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move somewhere else before then. And plus, the crucial different values part of this is that I value the freedom of being able to sit at a polling station and just get paid to literally read a book in between every person that comes up to vote, and getting paid less money than I value getting paid more money just to have more responsibility, and then just having a worse job, in my opinion, which like if that were for something that I cared about, like, I don't know, being in charge of some sort of organization to do with writing, for example, and talking with other authors, I probably would love that, because the content of the responsibility is more important to me. But just more power and responsibility just for the sake of more power and responsibility is not appealing to me. And some people, I think, sometimes more religious people too, like some of my more religious friends who I've talked to this about, and more like conservative or more libertarian, like small L, small C people, have valued this much more than I do too. Like just power and responsibility for the sake of power and responsibility, and money for the sake of money.
And that's why Canada will never be a world superpower. That's the like American ethos to a T, is the just like work hard and make money and you will win at life and be better than everybody, and you know, I don't know. Is it
even if you hate
fuck
yourself
100 virgins next?
family.
Is that what comes after that? I don't really know.
72.
What was I gonna say? There was something in what you were just talking about there. Oh yeah, so a couple of things. One is like, I think the idea of like working hard or like having to work hard, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think
that's a good thing. It's good to be disciplined.
That context has, or that like idea has been recontextualized towards money in a way that I don't necessarily think is good.
Yeah, I agree.
And
like that's ironically a
challenging yourself and doing things that are difficult and hard to overcome is how you learn how to do things and be better at stuff, and you know, like taking on responsibilities and ascending in levels of doing a thing. But that it doesn't always have to be about like the almighty dollar, as it were. You know, it can be about like improving at a skill. It can be about like increasing like improving a relationship, or increasing your knowledge in an area just for the sake of knowing more, or any of that other stuff. But all of what I was going to say before that I didn't get a chance to say was, the other thing that I found really interesting is how many people have sort of a like weird pride association with making their income. And what I mean by that is
a lot of
like
people here,
when
specifically in
came out and EI and all that stuff, there's like lots of people in my personal social circle, even, it seemed like, who were like sort of like, I hope it doesn't come to the point where I have to claim CERB. And I was like, what do you mean come to the point? Like, didn't you lose your job? And they're like, yeah, but like I have some money saved up, and like there's some other things I could do for money. And I'm like, okay, but like, why are you not applying for it? Well, because like I don't want the government to just be giving me a handout. And I was like, oh my fucking God. Like,
I might know who you're talking about.
I'm not, when I was like living in Fort McMurray, and there were people who were claiming EI because they had worked 4 months on their apprenticeship program at site and made $55 an hour, and now they had 3 months off before they went back to school, and they didn't want to get a job just because laziness, or because they couldn't get a job making $55 an hour, you know, doing something else, and then applying for EI. I remember being like, that feels dirty and lazy, and like you're like a shitty member of society to me. Like, I don't know how I feel about that. But like when you've lost your job because there's a global pandemic, and it's like your social responsibility to stay home unless you absolutely have to, I sort of feel like getting the money from the government that makes it a lot more possible for you to stay home and not give other people a virus is like a pretty admirable decision, if nothing else, you know, like not inadmirable or worth being shamed for, but like worth being, you know, admirable, worth being admired for, worth being looked up. Like, good for you. You made the decision to forgo your own personal needs and desires and instead make a decision for the greater good of humanity.
I think we it might be a different person, but we have a mutual friend who, I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, but may have been eligible for the CERB, but chose to not take it and get some other jobs and work instead, and that sort of thing. I mean, I would never propose to try, or I try to avoid at all costs trying to tell people what to do. But if that were me, I would say, why are you doing that, bro? You don't have to work. Why don't you just, I mean, like you said, it's better to, like, you'll be around people less and social distancing more, which is a good idea right now. So why don't you just get the CERB instead?
Well, so like I remember like in the time that we've had where the quarantine and social distancing protocols have been like in effect and people have been following them to varying degrees, I've had a lot of reflections on like, man, it'd be interesting to be a person who works in like a grocery store or at a fast food restaurant or something like that right now and be like,
Yeah.
I wonder how it must feel to have that be your job. Like, I
Yeah.
wonder how it must feel to be a guy who got that job at the beginning of February and only worked there for a month before his job suddenly became essential, and you can't really quit it because you won't be able to get hired anywhere else and you won't be eligible for CERB if you quit. Or also just like how, you know, it's sort of like lucky in some context that I had a job that isn't viewed as essential. So they were just closed for a few months and I was able to claim government income. You know, my one of my best friends in Vancouver works for a medical supply company delivering wound care machines. And like, he's not directly involved in like a surgical, you know, he doesn't like go into surgeries. He's not a doctor. He doesn't have a medical degree of any kind, but he works enough in the medical industry that it was required of him to continue working through the whole thing. And there have definitely been times where he's been like, man, sort of wish I could be like staying home, keeping myself safe and getting a bunch of money from the government instead of like going out to work and putting myself in harm's way right now. But that's the reality of the job he was doing versus the job I was doing, you know?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I know someone who works at a grocery store, and I've thought of that. I've thought of that myself too. Like, man, it would suck to work exactly the same sort of thoughts you were talking about. It would fucking suck to work at a grocery store. Like you had some regular job, suddenly your job is an enormous risk, and like some
Well,
people are
it's just
even
like,
calling you heroes, even though like you're some regular person. And like you said, it sucks to go there, but you're kind of, so to speak, stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if you quit your job, you won't be eligible to get the financial benefits of having had a job. So you have to either have your job and risk getting coronavirus, or quit your job and hopefully you have savings, or if you don't, perhaps risk losing your home. Depending on where you live, of course. Maybe that wouldn't happen if you live in Vancouver.
well, and it's like, you know, when people become doctors or emergency responders or epidemiologists or virologists or whatever, like, you know, you're kind of, by getting that job, you're signing on to a certain level of risk and necessity. You're like aware of the fact that when shit goes down in society, you're going to be the people we rely upon to like help out and fix people and protect us and all that other shit. You know, like when you sign up to be a cop or a firefighter or a doctor or a paramedic or whatever else in that large context of like emergency healthcare, keeping people alive response, you sign up for the risk and the demand and the like, people will expect you to be a hero factor on day one, you know? But like, I don't think most people who work at a grocery store walked into their job interview thinking like, I'm gonna save the world. I want this
Yeah,
job
exactly.
because I'm mad. You know, like it's not that I'm trying to detract 1 cent from the work that is done by grocery store workers, because they are obviously extremely essential. But there's not the same level of like, I will put myself in harm's way on purpose for the good of humanity that somebody knows they're undertaking when they become a doctor. It's sort of just an unknown reality of working at a food providing business, is like, people are going to need food. Even if they might have like a death virus, they're still going to need food. So you work there, well, I guess you need to put yourself at risk,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Which
That's
is
what I've
like
heard.
sort of the strongest hesitation or argument or whatever I would have right now for returning things to any level of normal, is like, I'm sort of like, as long as we don't have a vaccine, I don't know that anybody needs to be going out for leisure activities. You know, like obviously going outside and staying active on some level is necessary for human health and like mental health maintenance and whatever else you want to call it. But like, I'm pretty sure we could all get enough of that to stay sane in our living rooms and going out for walks in the trails. I don't know if we need to be reopening fitness centers and like gymnastic studios and all that kind of stuff. But the demand for that is high enough to make it a thing that they're doing. You know, like there's enough individual people who are like, I want to go do that. And on a lot of levels, as you and I were earlier discussing, there's enough employees of those businesses who aren't making enough money from government funding or whatever else to be able to afford to stay alive if they don't go back to doing that for work. But like for myself personally, say there's a version of reality where I'm able to just keep getting money from the government instead, I'm pretty much willing to not go back to work as long as they want me not to, or until the virus is gone, because I don't think it's necessary to undergo any increased level of risk for myself or increase the risk for other people by any increased level, just so that some people can rock climb, or just so that some people can lift some weights, or just so that some people can buy, you know, shoes or whatever else. Like, you know, the whole online shopping model is, as far as I'm aware, working well enough for people to be able to get the stuff they need. And if it's not working well enough to keep a bunch of businesses that were padding the bank accounts of CEOs open, maybe that's a good thing.
I don't know.
Like maybe it's not that bad of an idea if we like shake up the system a little and make it more feasible for less people to have to work less of the time. Like I was thinking about like, imagine a version of reality where there's no possibility of a vaccine and we have to find like a version of existence for forever that makes it possible to decrease social interaction and not spread the virus. I was thinking about probably what you'd have to do is you just have to have like rolling quarantine year round. Like you probably have to break up the population into like 4 groups or something, and every 3 months a different group of people would be in quarantine. So 3 months of the year you wouldn't work, and the other 9 months of the year you would, so that it creates a like population dynamic where only 75% of the people are going about and doing things at any given time. And I mean, you'd have to make it the case that your job would either provide you an income during that time or that you were eligible for government funding during that time. I mean, like teachers' incomes work around the idea that they won't be working for the summer, but teachers still need to have an income for the summer. So part of their paycheck every 2 weeks as a regular paycheck gets like put aside as part of their income for the summer, essentially.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean,
we could do that.
That's an interesting idea in theory. I don't know how feasible it is.
It'd be a logistical nightmare, also, obviously.
Like, I like the idea of people having to work less. I certainly do, especially since I like working on creative pursuits, and like we were talking about the Protestant work ethic. I myself suffer from that too much sometimes, and our culture suffers too much from it also, I think, because I think people are more happy when they have more balanced lives. But the way you were describing that, like people only working part of the year and then the rest having, well, I mean, like in terms of having enough money to pay people for doing that, and then also, I don't know, like the sound of like dividing people into these sections, that sounds like really authoritarian to me. And it, like, how would they divide these people into different sections? People would definitely have problems with it. I don't know. It's an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, but it'd be really complicated for a couple of reasons. One, it's like a logistical nightmare to try and just like divide the population when that division is significant. I mean, at a like just like purely logistical level, we already do that for things like driver licensing or like vehicle licensing. Like in Alberta, license and registration expiry dates are based around the first letters of your last name. Like different letters of the alphabet fall on different months, right? Like that's why growing up, our vehicle registration was always in December, because the first initial of Dad's last name is M. But like that kind of like completely arbitrary dividing up the population doesn't work when it's like groups of people that have to stay home. So I feel like the only way it would work is like basically you like the same way in some countries they have like mandatory 6 weeks vacation pay or 4 weeks vacation pay or whatever it is, weeks vacation pay. Businesses would be required to give like, what is that, 12 weeks vacation pay a year, but like legally that would be time that you're not like traveling to another country. It would be time where you're like self-isolating. And I mean, that's like some kind of like weird apocalyptic hypothetical reality. I don't think that's a version of reality we're ever actually going to really approach. One of the things we're really fortunate with the coronavirus right now is that doesn't seem to be mutating very significantly. Like there's some variations in different areas, but it's not like mutating like to a different strain the way that the flu does every season. So it seems like, at least right now, we'll be able to create a vaccine for it that should have some kind of longevity. But I mean, that's another one of those like big up in the air indeterminate factors right now is they don't know if the vaccine would be like permanent, and which also means they don't know if the immunity that has been developed by those who have recovered from corona will be permanent. Like having recovered from coronavirus doesn't necessarily guarantee that you won't ever be able to get it again. For all they know, it could mean you could get it another year from now or 6 months from now or 10 years from now or whatever it is. And like, imagine if it turns out that 6 months from now, like 6 months after you've had it, you're vulnerable to get it again. And we don't know that. And we let lots of those, because like there have been proposals for, especially in some of the countries where they neglected to social distance for longer periods of time, and they were proposing like creating a larger shield of herd immunity that would allow the economy to continue or things to stay normal. One of the proposed ideas was that like as people become recovered and are like essentially deemed immune by having had it, they would become people who start being allowed to do like essentially dangerous jobs where you could potentially contract it or come in contact with it, which I was like, fuck that. Like, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, you have to go like treat the dying patients now because you had the death virus. Like you've had the plague, so you can help the people with the plague now. Like,
that's literally
Game of Thrones shit.
That's literally straight up communism too. Like, you are designated into this category. You must do this job. Society functions this way. You do this job, you do that job.
Well, and I think like where it was being proposed, it was sort of proposed more as an idea of like, if you have, like you would get like a document from the hospital, say, that says you were tested positive for coronavirus and have recovered from it. If you have a piece of paper that says you've recovered from it, you'd be able to just like go out into the world and apply for any job. Whereas if you haven't contracted it, you're still like under the same, you know, more stringent social restrictions and guidelines and all that kind of stuff as everybody else.
Right.
Which I'm like, okay, that's a really good system to put into place. It seems like there would be like endless protests
having to have
against
this
that.
piece of paper saying that you don't have coronavirus too.
It's also, like something that would be extremely easy to fake. And then like the most important part of that I thought was, but then what if like, then we're like literally just asking for it to mutate or change. Like we're like basically assuming that immunity is everything. Really, like what's everything is getting it. You know, like the reason we want a vaccine is not because herd immunity is the ultimate goal no matter what. It's herd immunity is the ultimate goal while also not having people suffer from getting it. Because you can create herd immunity by everyone getting coronavirus. But a lot more fucking people are going to die from coronavirus if we try and create herd immunity by just letting everyone in the world get it and see who survives.
Yeah. You have to,
like,
you have to find a balance.
Unless we want to friggin' Hunger Games the entire planet with coronavirus, I sort of feel like we could just, you know, practice social distancing and maybe like chill out for a bit. And like, Am I choked that the Green Day, Weezer, and Fall Out Boy concert I was going to go to this summer is canceled, and like my life pursuit of being an actor is potentially on hold indefinitely? Yeah, of course. But like, I'd sort of rather not see the death of humanity and have like me get to do a couple of concerts and a theater performance. You know,
That's a little extreme, though. I'm not sure. I'm not
like
sure.
it's obviously it's a
I'm
little
not sure.
extreme, but
Death
like,
of humanity is
I
an
mean,
apt description. That, I mean,
what it certainly is we know now that bare minimum 2 to 3% and potentially as high as like 15% of the population of people who get it will die. And
I
assuming
don't
we did
believe as high
nothing,
as 15%.
that's the current global mortality rate.
15%.
Actually, it dropped to 14 yesterday. But yeah, it's gone up significantly. And part of that, they think, is because only severe cases get reported. The milder cases where people contract it, have symptoms, confirm from like at-home evaluation that they probably have it, and then just self-quarantine for 2 or 3 weeks and get better, don't necessarily show up in the statistics until like weeks or months after the fact that the person has had it. We're
Well,
only actually like 9 weeks into this thing for most of the planet. So it's sort of too early to make like strong determinations. But the unfortunate truth is, at least right now, we've mostly only seen the mortality rate go up.
yeah. Well, I mean,
And I mean, if 2 or 3% of the
if,
planet dies, that's still millions of people. Don't get me started on what happens if 15% of the planet dies,
that's not
which
going to happen.
obviously is probably not going to happen, but still.
That's well, and like you can, like you were just talking there about what you said earlier about how well, it reminded me how you, like, some people who have gotten the disease, they've survived the disease, but they've apparently had some they have some long-term health effects from it, like permanent severe respiratory detriments, basically, basically respiratory illness. Um, and in
Yeah, I
terms
think the
of
statistic I read relevant to that was something like, sorry, go on.
all right, I was gonna say, in terms of mutations, I've also heard too that like, depending on how it mutates, it can make the virus better or worse. Like, it can make it way more dangerous, way contagious, or it also can make it safer and increase people's chances of surviving from it and reduce symptoms. And there's also, oh yeah, I also wanted to comment on what you said earlier about how, like, the even already now, to a degree, what you were talking about earlier, how if this becomes a long-term thing, we already see various ways in how it's changing culture, especially, and it's like making us, oh shit, got kicked out again. I was just saying it is making us one step closer to that. Oh, there you go. Got back much quicker this time, at least. That's good.
That was just
Um,
entirely me being dumb. I was trying to get the video to go like full screen because it's like in just the top quadrant of my phone for some reason. But when I dragged my finger down on the screen, it automatically refreshed the page on Google Chrome, which makes me have to
okay,
relog into this session. But
okay.
anyways, go on.
Um, I was just saying too that it's all like with in terms of technology, it's getting us like one step closer to that stage that a lot of people have talked about, and I've read about in a lot of books and seen in a lot of movies, where it's just like people don't actually interact with each other in person. It's like a totally technological society. Everyone does everything virtually. Basically, that's how like society operates.
So I've only watched like 2.5 episodes so far. A podcast called The Darkest Timeline, which is riffing on a concept from the TV show Community, which is where Ken Jeong and Joel McHale, the two hosts of the podcast, know each other from primarily,
Oh,
and what they're like kind of both known
they're
from.
doing a
Ken
podcast
Jeong, of
about
course, is known
community.
for
That's cool.
Dr. Ken and the Hangover movies and other stuff, but he was in all 6 seasons of Community as well. Um, So it's them talking about the show, and I'm a pretty big fan of the show and have seen every episode, so like that's relevant to me. But it's also Ken is formerly a doctor and his wife still is, so it's him talking about corona, and it's also them talking about lots of other stuff. Sorry, what were you just talking about before that?
I was talking about I was talking about how the virus can mutate in
Oh,
both
sorry,
positive and
societal
negative ways.
change and
How,
people not interacting is what I
yes,
was going to talk
yes,
about.
okay.
So on their podcast, Ken Jeong is just sort of a goofball. He like without planning to, like without asking ahead of time to the person or without like telling his producers or anything, was just like, should we talk to Andrew Yang? I mean, I know him. And Joel was like, what? And he was like, I'm just going to call Andrew Yang. And he literally, like, they're on like a FaceTime session. And he just like called Andrew Yang on FaceTime as well. So he just like showed up as another video in their
Oh, that's cool.
podcast and was like, hello? And Ken was like, hey, Andrew, me and Joel are doing a podcast. Do you mind talking to us for a bit? And he was like, yeah, okay. So then they was just like talking about his ideas and stuff for a bit. And that's one of the things he was talking about is like, you know, universal basic income was kind of like his idea, or at least he's the person who popularized it. And that's one of the things he was talking about is like, this really illuminates, I think, to a lot of people how feasible UBI could be in some context and how much like that's what the world is trending towards anyways. Like, despite the fact, yes, okay, there's been a significant hit to the economy and there have been a massive number of changes and there's a lot still to be done to make this like work properly, if you want to use that terminology. It is observably true that it's survivable for a huge portion of humanity to not be working a pretty significant portion of the time, at least in an outside of the house context. Like, we could very feasibly move to a version of reality where most of the people do most of their work from home on a like make your own schedule basis fairly reasonably. Part of what holds that back is our current retail model requires that businesses have hours, which requires other people to set their schedules around those expectations. And that just doesn't really work for like individual lively lifestyles and desires and positions and whatever
I would
else you want
not
to call
mind
them,
it
right?
at all if society ran less on this like quote unquote early bird schedule where if you're not a morning person, you're like lazy, even if you get up late and do just as much work as someone who got up earlier.
Like, imagine if all the people who worked at a bank were basically setting like their own schedule based on the hours they would want to be working. I like, I don't know, maybe it would just be like terrible and it would result in there like never being anyone available because they all work from 6 to 3 every day. But I sort of feel like it would result in there just like kind of always being a couple people available, and maybe, you know, maybe like available as in like at work and they're like busy because there's demand, but like I feel like that would increase by a lot the likelihood of there being like someone able to help you with your banking problem at like 10 p.m. or like, you know, not just 8 to 4 Monday to Friday, which is like not just infeasible for those of us that are fucking lazy and like to sleep in a lot and stay up really late, but also like people who work jobs those hours. Like, some of the hardest times in my life I've ever had trying to like figure something out that requires me to like go to a bank or go to a doctor's office or go to any kind of institution that keeps those kind of hours is when I've just had that kind of job. So the only way to go there is to not go to your job, which is like, what? Huh? Why? You know, like it sort of blows my mind that we don't already live in a society where like every different industry has like slightly different hours to make it possible for each other to interact with each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, that would be a logistical nightmare to coordinate. So
Yeah, definitely. And like a large portion of the population would be like protesting that probably.
well, I think like one of the things I think about is like, I think the model of universe, and maybe it would only be a like transitional model that then eventually we would move away from, but like a model of universal basic income that it seems to me could potentially be functional is something where like you're providing enough income to people to be like subsistence, but not really enough to actually survive very well on.
Like
So if
$1,000
you
a
want to
month that
have,
Andrew Yang proposed.
yeah, like $250 a week or something like that. So if you're not going to work at all, you're pretty much going to have to be like camping out in your van and, you know, foraging for berries a lot and doing and yeah, sure, there are some people who would be doing that. But like, how much of a draw on society is it really if those people are able to do that without causing any other problems? And they're
Yeah.
still, you know, like paying for gas or paying the rent at their, you know, really small apartment or eating, you know, they're still like spending that money somehow. They're not keeping all of it in a bank account somewhere, or they wouldn't be claiming the money every week.
Mm.
And most of the people will probably have some form of income. What I think it would mostly result in is just lots of people who only need a little bit more than that income to have the lifestyle they want to have, not having a full-time job, having a part-time job, and being able to spend a lot more of their time doing the things they want to do. And then
Mhm.
people who want to have more money and work a full-time job to make that money will just have slightly more money than they would have had if they were just working. And the proposal that Andrew Yang had already, which is the proposal I've seen from anywhere I've seen a reasonable model of a universal basic income strategy, is that anybody who wants to could refuse it and be able to like claim that on their taxes as income they didn't earn against the income they were earning instead. Like if you're making a lot of, if you're a rich person and you're like, I don't need $250 a week, I make like $250 an hour, you can just not take that universal basic income and be able to claim that on your taxes as you know, it's money you didn't take from the government that you could use against how much you have to pay in income tax. It's sort
Mhm.
of a like works for everyone situation.
Especially if you describe it that way. I certainly would have no
Yeah.
problem with that. Like if I got $1,000 a month, I could, because I don't have any expenses or anything like that, I could use that money to pay for college, and I could not have to work that much, or it would at least be a lot easier to only just tutor somewhat, which I'm obviously not doing right now, and still have enough money to mostly focus on all of my creative pursuits. And then another thing I was thinking about, when you were describing that, is another way that Andrew Yang was selling this to people, is that he was saying, like, for example, oh yeah, he was saying that in places where this has been tried before, the largest populations of people who stopped working or worked less were teenagers who don't contribute that much to the economy in general anyway, or less so than adults, even though they're in like fast food jobs and places like that. And the other largest group that was working less was single mothers, which is a good thing, really, because if they don't have to work as much, they can, like, not have to work two or three full-time jobs and be able to support their child or children, and be able to actually spend more time with them and have more of a balanced function as a mother too, or as a parent in general.
So one of like Andrew Yang's kind of like, which is a point he made in his podcast and a point he's made lots of other places too, I think, is putting money in the pockets of people is good for the economy. And further to that point, which is
It's
something
like
I encountered on the internet, I
trickle
think
trickle
yesterday or
up
today.
economics instead of trickle down economics.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you give an individual consumer $10 and they take that 10, like you just give it to them, not they had to work for it, you just give them $10 for free. And they take that $10 and they go to a business and they buy food with it. And then that business owner takes that $10 and buys gas. And then that gas station owner takes that $10 and buys groceries for his family. And then that grocery store owner takes that $10 and buys, shoes for his son. And, like use that $10 as part of the money to buy shoes for his son or whatever. And the buck stops there, if you will, because now he bought a product that doesn't give somebody, he bought those shoes from somebody. That $10 is now in the pockets of the shoe store owner, and so on and so forth. That kind of money and that kind of spending benefits everybody. That has been $50 of economic interaction, and then 60, and then 70, and then, every time that 10 passes on again, it creates more. When you put $10 in the pockets of a rich person, it goes in a bank account and does fucking nothing for fucking anybody. So stop giving rich people money and give money to poor people. Because part of that too is like, not that I'm trying to call you a poor person, but like you don't have a lot of money.
I am a poor person.
For the sake of this argument, you're a poor person. If you give you $250 a week all of a sudden, what are you going to do with that money? Are you going to put it in, like, you're either going to save that up to in the future be able to make an investment or go to school or buy a thing, or you're going to spend the money. What you're definitely not going to do is put that money in a bank account until you die.
Yeah.
There's no way a poor person with very little income will put their government income into a bank account and sit on it until their death. They're going to use it for something either today or eventually. So what you're likely going to promote is a boost in just the local economy, just individual spending, consumer action. And maybe some of that will be useless spending. It'll be buying shit they don't need. But hopefully some of it will be buying clothes for a job interview, or buying stuff they needed for their house, or buying food for their kids, or buying whatever else. And maybe they'll save up for something, like in your context, I would say, like if suddenly universal basic income of $250 a week became a thing tomorrow with no strings attached from the government, you could spend the summer living with no expenses still, as you are, saving all that money, and have like $5,000 to go out and start a life somewhere, and still be getting $1,000 a month to get you by while you're getting a part-time job and getting some furniture and paying a damage deposit. And that's basically like a short-term loan, but instead it was just your income from the government and some reasonable financial decisions on your part. Or if you're a person and this is the ultimate truth, is most people in poverty are pretty much stuck where they are because they're spending all their available time just to make enough money to get by. It's not like because they're lazy and they only work 10 hours a week. That's as much work as they can get, or more often than not, they have like 4 jobs and they work 75 hours a week, but they only make minimum wage. So that's just still not enough money to have very much money. If they were still doing that much and making $1,000 a month more, they'd be able to maybe start making some dents on some of their debts, or buying some of the things they need, or paying for a slightly better lifestyle that maybe makes them feel better, or maybe get to a place where they could quit all their jobs, because invariably I'm sure they're making more than $1,000 off 75 hours a week, I would hope, but work slightly less and have slightly more available time to, as you said, be a single mother and parent their kids, or study that subject they've been meaning to study so they can finish their degree, or again, maybe just save up some of that money, not all of it, but a little of it, so that they can eventually go back to school or whatever, like almost exclusively when you give the lowest income earning people in society a small amount of money, that money benefits essentially everybody.
I mean, like,
rarely do, those people go off and just buy like useless toys that they didn't really need. And even if you gave everybody in Canada universal basic income next month, and every single person exclusively spent that money on stuff that didn't contribute to their livelihood, like they, spent it on boats and toys and fried chicken and, stuff that wasn't necessary, that's still a huge contribution to the economy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's still numerous business owners who made profits.
Yeah. I mean, like, well,
Basically, what I'm saying is, Justin Trudeau, keep giving me free money, please.
Like someone with a more right-leaning perspective would say that, you know, some of those people are gonna use it to buy drugs and get high on heroin and shit like that. But like you said, I think that's probably the minority of people. And also, like we were talking about, as single mothers, for example, but not just families in general. If you have to work less, you can spend more time with your family, and it's not like every instance of people being forced to spend more time with their family is leading to increased suicide rates and domestic abuse and alcohol use. Yes, that's happening, but a lot of people clearly are benefiting from being able to spend more time with their families. And that's actually sort of a conservative argument for this in a way, because family is a conservative value. And also, like, people an increasing number of people having more and more debt is not good for the way an economy functions generally, because if an economy in general is relying so much on debt, then that economy is much more at risk to crashing, as I say, as like this phenomenal expert on economics that I am, based on like
Well, I mean, at a really basic level, if most of the people are in a significant amount of debt, those people have a hard time being active consumers, right?
Mhm.
Like the more debt you're in and the more you're struggling to like pay off your debts and make payments on your debts and all that kind of stuff, the less money you have available to just like buy shit. And
Mhm.
if you're not buying stuff, you're not keeping the economy alive. The unfortunate sort of dangerous truth of our capitalist economic model is it only works as long as people continue buying things. That's part of why it doesn't work to like make products that last a long time anymore, because then you can't continue to be a company. Once everybody owns the TV that lasts for 70 years, now there's a 70-year gap before anyone fucking needs a TV again. So you have to find ways to innovate by making them bigger and making them better. Or as they started to do like a little before you and I were born, they just started making shit fucking suck so it would break in a few years and you had to buy a new one.
Yep,
Like,
exactly.
I swear to God, our grandparents had refrigerators that they like got for their wedding and like didn't replace until their retirement. And like everybody I know gets their refrigerator replaced every couple of years. And not just
Mhm.
because like the new one is better and does more stuff. It's like because their fridge stopped fucking working.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think we should end it here for now,
Yeah, I'm
unless
cool
there's
to wrap it
anything
up.
else
I
you
have
want to
some other
talk
stuff
about.
to do tonight too, anyways.
Okay. It was great to talk to you, bro.
Yeah, I guess sort of my like closing point on all of this is, as has been the continuing case through this whole pandemic, I'll be very interested to look back on this video a couple weeks or a couple months from now and see what my perspective on my current perspective is then. Because I've looked back at like some of the text messages and conversations I had with people in like late February and early March, and holy shit, has my perspective on the entire world changed. Like, just night and day in some regards, you know? I think about conversations I had with people working at Climate 5 like the week before we shut down, and how completely different my perspective on things is now. And I'm just like, man.
Yeah, you seem to be really extremely like worried at first. I was worried about how worried you were.
Well, I think it's just like, as I think I tried to stress to you at one point, I'm just like a lot more connected to the pandemic in terms of like my proximity to it. There's a lot more reported cases of it here than there are in Alberta, let alone or were at the time at the very least, and certainly than there are in Fort McMurray. And like Vancouver is like an international travel hub and has like millions of people. Fort McMurray is a small community that's fairly isolated, you know.
Mm,
So and then also just I had seen some reasons to be concerned about how things were developing in other places in the world and what the consequences were of some places that didn't take it seriously. Unfortunately, I happen to live in a place that took it very seriously, but that was sort of happenstance. That didn't have a lot to do with my own decisions to be safe or not be safe. Like, I decided to start self-isolating and quarantining because the businesses I worked at started having to shut down all of their operations, and I had no work to go do anyways. And I was like, well, if I can't go do any work, it doesn't make sense for me to like go to the fucking mall and just like expose myself on purpose for fun. Like, wouldn't that be retarded? I'm just gonna stay at home and do nothing until things get better. And then, you know, things got worse, and I was like, oh, okay, this is like really serious. I'm just gonna hunker down and watch a lot of TV.
You just reminded me too. I remember at the start of this, before this all happened, you and I were planning on, we were trying to work it around when my final exams were going to be. I was gonna come to Vancouver to see Joe Rogan's live comedy show with you. That was supposed to be on 420, so it would have been like a fucking amazing 420 celebration. And I was like, I think my exams might be shifted. I think I might still be able to go there. And you were saying, I don't think you should come, bro. And I'm like, I think people can still travel now. And then it ended up getting canceled anyway. We weren't sure for a little while, but then the social distancing and all
Well, it was
that kind of stuff
crazy
got more extreme.
how quickly things change too. Because
Yeah.
like I remember the first day we were talking about it, I was like, I don't know if you should be flying, dude. Like, it's a big risk, and like you don't want to put that risk on mom and like all this other stuff. And then like 2 days later, it was like, yeah, no, the concert's canceled, and like if you flew to Vancouver, they would make you quarantine for 2 weeks. So like you don't want to fly here right now. Like,
Yeah.
definitely no. Well, and now it's like it's tentatively rescheduled for October, but the BC government is saying they're basically not looking at reopening any offerings for large concerts or like theater or performance gatherings where large amounts of people are in close quarters for long periods of time until like herd immunity is achieved or like a vaccine is available, basically.
Oh,
So
that's definitely not going to be
that's
October.
probably not going to be October. So I guess like we'll just kind of have to continue to wait and see on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
anyways, it's been a good chat. I think we covered some good topics, and
Yeah, for
talk to
sure.
you again soon, Brett.
All right, let me say all this stuff I like to say at the end of the video here, and then you can give any last words. All right, so
Yeah.
thanks to everyone for watching. Hope you found this as interesting as we did, and thanks to everyone who subscribes to my channel. I keep kind of getting a few subscribers here and there, which is good. I keep getting more. And thanks to everyone who clicks the like button on this video and shares it, and especially thanks to those of you who give me money on Patreon. I'm really grateful for that. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. Most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. And also, groove is in the heart. And try to get through this pandemic in the best way that you can, regardless of what your circumstances are. All right, anything else to say before we end it there, bro?
If you're interested in checking out my Corona covers, you can find those on YouTube or any other social media. You can just look up Corona covers, or my name is Nick Heffelfinger. I think Andrew's putting that in the title of this video somewhere.
I'll add the link
and
for
Andrew
your
will add the
YouTube
link as
channel.
well.
Yeah, I'll add it in the description for this.
And if you want a good, feel good, upbeat, funky groove in the heart tune to finish off your day with, I would recommend a song called "With the Love in Your Heart" by an artist named Jacob Collier, which I will
that's
send
one
to
you
you
showed
in
me.
chat. Yeah, it's a good jam.
Cool. All right, cool. Thanks, bro. And thanks
Peace
again,
out, hombre.
everyone, for watching. Adios until next time.